Hello, my name is Kyle and I'm coming to you from K2 Excel Solutions. I want to take a look at 401ks and give you a tool that you can use when determining if participating in a 401k is financially beneficial or if it's harmful. So I titled this presentation and Excel spreadsheet demo 401k to contribute or not to contribute. So let's get right in. Key questions are, should you contribute to your 401k plan? Because a lot of people think it's a given. If it's available, you absolutely should, people think. Is your employer match good enough to justify participation? That is the question. But there's a misconception that participating is always the right thing to do. So we're going to take a closer look at that as well. So to answer the first two questions, in order to decide, you must compare the employer contributions relative to how much you're paying in fees. And to answer the second question, it's a simple no. It's not always the right thing to do. So employer contribution versus fund fees. So these are the four examples we're going to look at. We're going to look at Harry, who has a high employer match, Larry, who has a low employer match, Ned, that has no employer match, and Joe with an average match. So these are what those matches are. So your employer contribution is blue and your employer match is yellow. So Harry with the high match has a 6% employer contribution with a 100% match. So that means if he makes $100 a year and Harry puts in $6, the employer is going to put in $6. Okay? So and Larry with low match, if you put in if you make $100 a year and you contribute $4, if Larry contributes $4, the employer is going to contribute $1. And Ned with no match, if you had made $100 and contributed 4%, the employer would contribute 0%. And Joe with an average match, if he contributed 4.7%, the employer would match him 100% at 4.7%. So, for example, this is kind of what I just went through, but just to help you, personally, my employer contributes up to 4% of my yearly salary with a 50% match. So, what that means is if I contribute 2% of my salary, my employer will give me effectively 1%. If I contribute 4% of my salary, my employer will give me effectively 2%. If I contribute 6%, because they capped it off at 4%, the maximum they're ever going to contribute is 2%. So that's what this describes, the employee contribution effective. So I would put in 6%, Harry would, and his employer would put in 6%. Larry puts in 6%, and his employer puts in 1%. Ned puts in 6%, his employer puts in 0%, and Joe puts in 6%, and the employer, which is capped out at 4.7%, puts in 4.7%. So this 4.7% is the national average. So this is right in the middle, and this is considered above average, below average, and obviously nothing. So this is how much you would expect to pay in mutual funds. There are a lot of costs, management fees, a whole list of fees that get bundled in with mutual fund fees, but you're going to see that typically it's around 2%, sometimes less, a lot of times more. So these are the numbers. Is 401k always a good idea? The answer, flat out, no. Depends. But what about the employer match? Isn't that free money? That's what people like to think. But in reality, just because your employer has a match, it doesn't mean it's financially beneficial to participate. And here's why. So imagine you have a bucket, all right? And the bucket represents your 401k. And the water inside the bucket represents your account value. Let's put that up here. Water being poured into the bucket from the cup is your employer contribution. So your employer is pouring money into the bucket. The the water leaking out through the holes in the bottom of the bucket are your fees. So, as you can imagine, as long as the employer contribution is more than your fees, then you are happy. But if your employer contribution is less than your fees, you're sad. All right, but what happens when your employer contribution is a lot less than your fees? Like, that's what this would look like. There's a gaping hole in the bottom of the bucket, and the employer contribution is way less than what's going out. It actually makes you angry. All right? So what does your 401k look like? Does it look reasonable where the employer contribution is more than the fees that are going out? Or does your 401k look more like this? So let's take a closer look at these numbers. You've seen this before. So I'm going to open up this spreadsheet here. This is what I made, and if you would like this, just email me at kyle.harris12321@gmail.com. But here's a quick demo on how it works. So how many years do you retire? Let's say 40 years. My current salary, let's also say $50,000. And the starting amount, that's how much money do I currently have in my 401k account. Let's say it's $20,000. All right. So my yearly annual salary raise, let's be optimistic and say for the next 40 years, I'm going to get a 5% raise. All of these numbers are changed that are custom. You can customize it to your personal situation. So my yearly contribution is, let's say 6%. And of my salary, and my employer match is 6%. And let's say they match 100%. Okay, and this is, you can choose different, so this is the average continuous growth rate of 8%, assume you get that every year. You could also say 10%. There are a bunch of options that you can play with on your own, but this is just a quick demo. So the mutual fund fees, you expect to pay 2%, and for an index fund, which are a lot cheaper, I'll get into that a little bit more later, is 0.1%. Okay, so this is what you would have. So the orange line is how much you're paying in fees. The blue line is how much your employer contributions are. And I did this for each of the numbers, each of these situations here. Okay, so that's what I did. So the first was high match Harry. So this is this time for the first 20 years, the employer contribution was greater than the fees. And for the rest of his working career, Harry was paying more in fees than his employer was contributing. So next we have low match Larry. So Larry has some match, and that's this blue line that's slowly going up. But look at what happened. He's paying all of this in fees. So employer contribution is a lot less than fees here. So just because he's getting some money from his employer doesn't mean it's a good idea necessarily. So no match Ned, as you would expect. So his employer contributions are 0. That blue line is not rising at all. And this is average Joe. This is his match. So as you can see, the employer contribution is shown in green here when it's more than fees, and when it's less than the fees, it's here. So absorb that for a second, and I will break it down a little bit more. So let's take a closer look at average Joe. This orange line represents how much the fees you pay in mutual funds, versus this is how much he pays in index funds. Okay, so what you'll see, in index funds, the employer contributions are always more than he's paying in fees. The green zone is substantial, and over here the red zone is substantial. That means the green zone means that's money you're keeping for the next 40 years, and you're able to continue to compound that money. Over here, this is money you lose. This is a loss of opportunity cost. You're not able to to compound on that money because you're paying it in fees. So the index funds are represented by this bucket of water with just a little bit coming out in fees, and mutual funds are this with the bucket of water with a lot of water going out in fees. So performance comparison. So mutual funds, they're considered actively managed. That means there's a money manager who's choosing what companies to invest into, and most of the time, little spoiler, most of the time they're invested into index funds anyways, at least for a portion of their portfolio. So they have high fees because they're actively managed. So you have to pay a big staff to do research and all that. But so that means they're expensive to own. But the question is, do the returns made by mutual funds justify the high fees? And the sad truth is mutual funds consistently underperform compared to broad market index funds, and it's not even close. So index funds are passively managed. That means there's low fees. They're cheap to own. Index funds, what they do is they just match the returns of the market, such as the Dow or the S&P 500. Index funds outperform mutual funds for this reason. So if you're invested into a 401k and you're invested in mutual funds, if index funds are an option, consider investing into the index funds as opposed to the mutual funds. So let's look at the retirement impact from fees. So index funds, as I discussed, fees are typically 0.1%. And with mutual fund, fees are typically 2% or more. So let's take a comparison between how much average Joe would have upon retirement in 40 years if he was to invest into index funds versus mutual funds. So this is what you would see. Index funds is represented by the green line, and mutual funds are represented by the blue line. So that is a 36% difference in the amount of money you have when you go to retire. That's over $1 million damage done to your retirement account. So in conclusion, so that's it. In conclusion, you can totally have access to this spreadsheet. Let me know. My email is at kyle.harris12321@gmail.com, and this is a tool that is personalizable to you, that you can input your financial situation in here, and it'll show you, among a lot of other things that I didn't even get into, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Take a look at it. But yeah, this points out that index funds are highly superior to mutual funds just because of the difference in cost. And if that's an option at your work, I'm not your financial advisor, but consider investing into index funds as opposed to mutual funds. And that's all I have to say. So thanks. I look forward to hearing from you. Bye.